What happened next on live television left Mark Levin completely speechless and may have just changed how America sees young black lawyers forever. The 76-year-old conservative radio host thought he could humiliate Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett about her law degree on national television, but he was dead wrong, because the moment Crockett pulled out that manila folder and calmly said, "Mr. Levin, let us talk about legal credentials," the entire studio fell silent. And what she revealed did not simply dismantle Levin's argument. It exposed something much larger, about how the legal establishment tries to silence rising voices. What made this confrontation even more shocking was the context, because just hours before the show, Levin had been backstage boasting to producers about how he was going to teach the young Congresswoman a lesson in real legal expertise. His confidence was absolute to the point that he requested extra time for what he proudly called an educational moment for the viewers, and the producers, sensing potential drama, agreed to extend the segment, not knowing they were about to witness the most complete intellectual demolition in television history. Levin's team believed they had a foolproof strategy researching Crockett's law school, ranking noting that it was not among the top-tier institutions, and preparing questions about her lack of Supreme Court clerkships or major law firm experience. It was a playbook that had worked countless times before against younger, less experienced opponents, but this time it would collapse before their eyes. The confrontation began when Levin, in his trademark aggressive style, went after Crockett's legal background during what was supposed to be a routine policy discussion, not realizing that she had come prepared for battle. The studio itself seemed to sense the coming storm as camera operators instinctively shifted their angles and the lighting crew cast dramatic shadows, while in the control room the producer ordered that the cameras roll without interruption, declaring that history must not be cut short for advertisements. At 76, Mark Levin sat at the desk adjusting his glasses with the same scowl that had intimidated so many before him, his reputation built on rapid-fire legal arguments and Ivy League credentials, while his radio show reached millions and his books sold across the country. He assumed Crockett would be another easy target, but he underestimated her entirely because she and her team had studied his tactics, meticulously watching hours of past interviews and preparing for his signature credential attacks. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett at 43, composed and sharp, in a navy blazer, her natural hair styled with confidence, a woman who had grown up in a working-class family in Missouri, watching her parents work multiple jobs, her father driving trucks by day and guarding offices by night, while her mother cleaned buildings at dawn before preparing her children for school. In that household, education was not just important, it was the only path forward. And when Crockett chose to pursue law, she faced a dilemma of whether burden herself with debt at an elite school or select a strong institution that would allow her to rise without bankrupting her family. She chose Prairie View A&M because it offered practical training, real cases, and a mission to serve the community. And by the time she graduated summa cum laude, she had already argued before a federal judge and helped secure a civil rights settlement that changed local policy. Unlike many of her peers who took high-paying jobs at corporate firms, she plunged into civil rights cases that affected real lives, winning her first major victory just 2 years out of law school when she challenged a discriminatory hiring practice at a major corporation and secured both damages and permanent policy changes. Her reputation grew steadily as judges began to recognize her name on filings, knowing that her arguments would be thorough, well-researched, and persuasive. And though she declined lucrative offers from top firms, she did so deliberately because she had no interest in protecting corporations from regulation when her calling was to protect ordinary people from injustice. For her, the fight was personal, rooted in her own childhood when she had seen discrimination firsthand and witnessed talented classmates discouraged from pursuing education. Her legal career became the tool to ensure that others would not face those barriers without someone fierce and qualified to defend them, and by the time she stepped into politics, her resume was already that of a seasoned fighter whose every battle was backed by purpose and results. Most attorneys could only dream of the record she had built because Jasmine Crockett had argued before federal appellate courts, won landmark civil rights cases, and been recognized by legal organizations across the political spectrum for her excellence and integrity, yet because she had not followed the traditional route through Ivy League schools and corporate law firms, many establishment figures continue to underestimate her. The stakes in that studio could not have been higher, for this was not merely about two lawyers debating criminal justice policy, but about a generational and cultural clash that had been simmering in legal circles for years. Mark Levin stood as the embodiment of the old guard, the conservative legal establishment that had long dominated, while Crockett represented something new, young, diverse, unafraid to challenge the status quo. The moderator had barely finished introducing the segment when Levin leaned forward with that familiar smirk that had humiliated so many opponents before him, believing he had already won. He thought he had done his homework because Crockett had graduated from a historically black law school rather than the Ivy League, and in his mind that made her an easy mark. Before we discuss criminal justice, Levin began with a condescending tone. I think the audience deserves to know about the legal qualifications of the people making these arguments. Crockett's brows lifted slightly, but her expression remained calm, for she had heard this song before the credential, questioning the subtle suggestion that because she was not a graduate of Harvard or Yale, she was somehow unworthy of equal respect. I am happy to discuss qualifications, Mr. Levin, she replied, evenly, her voice steady, but carrying an undertone of challenge, and the audience felt the tension thicken as clips of the exchange began to circulate across social media before the debate had even begun in earnest. Behind the scenes, her team had prepared meticulously for this very moment, for they knew Levin's tactic was always to strike first at credentials, hoping to put his opponents on the defensive, but Crockett had transformed that weakness into her weapon. Every document in the manila folder before her had been carefully assembled, researched, verified, and organized for maximum impact, and her communications director, watching from the green room, already sensed that instead of damage control, they might soon be preparing for a victory lap, that Levin's attack came swiftly and brutally, designed to humiliate and diminish as he leaned back in his chair, dripping with smug confidence. Ms. Crockett, you went to some law school in Texas that most people have never heard of. Did you not exactly the kind of legal training we would expect from someone trying to lecture the American people about constitutional law? The audience gasped, for even by the standards of political television, this was unusually personal. Levin pressed on, emboldened by the reaction, insisting that when discussing serious legal matters, the country should hear from lawyers who had attended serious schools, reminding viewers that he himself had gone to Temple University, served in the Reagan Justice Department, and been Chief of Staff to Attorney General Edwin Me. And what exactly are your qualifications beyond being elected to Congress? He demanded. Crockett's jaw tightened, but her composure did not waver, for years of facing such dismissals had taught her patience and discipline. Mr. Levin, are you suggesting that the quality of legal education is determined solely by the prestige of an institution? She asked, her voice still steady. I am suggesting, Levin shot back, his tone rising, that when it comes to constitutional interpretation and criminal justice policy education, and experience matter, and frankly your background does not inspire confidence in your ability to grasp these complex issues. The words fell like a gauntlet thrown across the studio floor, and the audience shifted uneasily, some nodding along with Levin, but others visibly uncomfortable at the naked condescension. This was no longer a policy debate, but character assassination disguised as credential verification, and in green rooms across the building, guests scheduled for later segments sat transfixed at their monitors. A former federal prosecutor waiting for his turn shook his head, knowing instinctively that the fight unfolding on stage would become one of those rare confrontations seared into memory of political television. The former prosecutor watching from the green room muttered that Levin had just made a huge mistake, while a constitutional law professor from a prestigious university leaned forward with growing interest, recognizing that the veteran host had walked into a trap he did not even know existed. Political operatives from both parties scrambled to take notes, because this kind of clash could define careers, create viral moments, and shift entire narratives about competence and credibility in American politics. The moderator attempted to step in and calm the exchange, but Levin was not finished, insisting that the American people deserved to know when someone was speaking beyond their expertise, reminding Crockett that being a congresswoman did not make her a constitutional scholar. Almost instantly, social media exploded with a hashtag Levin versus Crockett trending, as conservative accounts praised him for asking what they called tough questions, while others condemned what they saw as obvious bias and disrespect. The split screen told its own story, because Levin's face was turning redder by the second, his usual composure unraveling under the weight of his own arrogance, while Crockett remained cool, deliberate, and serene, like a chess master 10 moves ahead of an opponent, still trying to learn the rules. In newsrooms across the nation, producers scrambled to call legal experts because this was no longer just a political moment, but a cultural phenomenon, the David and Goliath narrative rewriting itself in real time, with Crockett stepping into the role of unexpected giant slayer. Inside the studio, the air had grown tense. Some of Levin's supporters in the audience nodded along, but many others looked uneasy. Black audience members were visibly upset, and even some white viewers shifted in their seats, sensing that a line had been crossed. Behind the cameras, the crew exchanged knowing glances, for they had seen many debates before, but never one so nakedly personal, so obviously designed to humiliate rather than illuminate. A senior producer in the control room noted grimly that this was part of a familiar pattern, because Levin's fiercest credential attacks had nearly always been directed at women of color and younger minority professionals, while white male guests with weaker resumes rarely faced such scrutiny. In the makeup room earlier that evening, Crockett had betrayed no nervousness to the artist touching up her appearance. If anything, she seemed almost eager, her calm confidence suggesting she had been waiting for this exact moment her entire career, and Crockett's deliberate movements confirmed it when she reached for the manila folder at her side. "Mr. Levin, since you want to discuss legal credentials and education, I think that is an excellent idea. In fact, I have done some research of my own," she began. The smirk on Levin's face faltered because this was not how the script usually went. Most opponents tried to dodge his credential traps, but Crockett was leaning directly into it. "You mentioned your law school, Temple University," she continued, opening the folder. "And now that is a fine institution. Do not get me wrong, but since you think institutional prestige matters so much, let us talk about rankings." The audience fell silent, sensing the dynamic shift, as Levin's confidence began to crack. She pulled out a record and said, "You also mentioned your work in the Reagan Justice Department, which is interesting, because according to the employment records I have here, you were a low-level staff attorney for 8 months before leaving for private practice, hardly the senior constitutional role you have implied all these years." Levin flushed red and tried to object, but Crockett cut him off with precision. "You want to compare legal credentials? Mr. Levin, let us really compare them." She produced another document, her voice steady and sharp. "I spent over a decade as a civil rights attorney before entering Congress. I argued before federal appellate courts. I won landmark discrimination cases. I authored briefs cited by federal judges." "How many appellate cases have you argued, Mr. Levin?" His mouth opened, but no words came, and Crockett pressed a point, answering for him with ruthless accuracy. "0. You have never argued before an appellate court. Your entire legal career consists of 8 months as a junior attorney, followed by decades of writing books and hosting radio shows." The murmurs in the studio grew louder as she laid down another challenge, pulling out transcripts. "You want to talk scholarship? I graduated summa cum laude from my law school. I was editor of the Law Review. I received the Outstanding Graduate Award." "What were your grades, Mr. Levin?" Silence filled the studio, and his face drained pale as the audience shifted from murmurs to open astonishment. "And here's my favorite part," she declared, drawing out a thick legal brief. "This is a federal filing I submitted last year on a constitutional issue involving Fourth Amendment protections, and it was cited favorably by the judge in setting precedent to protect citizens' rights." She fixed him with an unblinking stare. "When was the last time you actually practiced law, Mr. Levin? When was the last time you filed a brief, question a witness, or represent a client? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like I am the only practicing attorney in this conversation." The studio erupted in applause, gasps, and cheers as social media exploded again, with Crockett Destroys now trending alongside Levin versus Crockett. In the control room, the director ordered every angle captured, whispering to his team that this would be replayed 1,000,000 times. Even the technical crew, normally trained to remain neutral, exchanged amazed glances, because in all their years of political television, they had never seen such a thorough dismantling of a supposedly untouchable figure. In law firms across the nation, senior partners called in their associates to watch the live stream, telling them that this was exactly what it meant to be